Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into a term that everybody thinks they know, Stockholm Syndrome. We're going to break down why it's so famous, why science actually officially rejects it, and what's really going on when a victim seems to bond with their abuser.
Let's just start with this quote, because it gets right to the heart of what we're talking about today. This isn't just about dramatic bank robberies or kidnappings. It's about a psychological trap that can form in any relationship, maybe even one you know. So what is this thing that can feel so much like love, but is actually born from fear?
To really get why this whole idea completely captured the world's imagination, we have to go back to where it all started. We're talking about a bank vault in Sweden, way back in 1973.
Okay, so for 6 incredibly tense days, the whole world was glued to this drama. It started as a violent crime, but by the end, something really bizarre had happened. The hostages, the very people whose lives were being threatened, were now actively protecting their captors. One of them even got engaged to a captor later on. It's this wild paradox that gave birth to a legend, Stockholm Syndrome.
Now here is where things get really complicated. Because even though Stockholm Syndrome is a household name, it has this one giant problem. It's not actually an official psychiatric diagnosis.
And yeah, that raises a pretty huge question, doesn't it? If everyone and their mother has heard of it, why don't the experts, the people who literally write the book on mental disorders, the DSM, why don't they recognize it?
Well, basically, the scientific community looks at Stockholm Syndrome and sees a bunch of fascinating stories, but not hard data. There's no standard checklist to diagnose it, and most importantly, the symptoms, the fear, the anxiety, that confusing attachment, they look an awful lot like post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, which is a very well-researched, very real condition. So a lot of experts argue the term is really more of a media-friendly urban myth than a clinical reality. Okay, so if it's not Stockholm Syndrome, then what in the world is actually going on inside a victim's mind? Let's peel back that pop culture label for a second and look at the real psychological engine that's running under the hood. The term that's much more accurate, the one clinicians actually use, is trauma bonding. And this isn't some strange, mysterious thing. It's a predictable, incredibly powerful attachment that gets forged in the fire of an abusive cycle. It's not love. It's a set of invisible chains.
So, how does this bond even form? Well, it works kind of like this. The abuser creates this state of intense fear and total dependency. Then, out of the blue, they offer a tiny, unpredictable act of kindness. A moment of calm, maybe a small favor. For the victim, who's been starved of any kindness, that little mercy feels absolutely monumental. Their brain translates that feeling of relief into gratitude, and that gratitude creates a bond. And this cycle just repeats, over and over, getting stronger every single time.
And what's truly wild is that this cycle has a real physical effect on our brain chemistry. It creates an addictive loop that is incredibly hard to break free from.
It is exactly like playing a slot machine. You pull the lever, you lose, you lose, you lose. The tension is building. You're about to give up and walk away, and then, bam, you win a small jackpot. Your brain is flooded with dopamine, that pleasure chemical. That rush of relief is so powerful it keeps you glued to the machine, even though you know, logically, you're losing overall. An abusive relationship with a trauma bond is, quite literally, addictive.
Okay, so we've covered the psychology of it. But there's an even deeper layer here. Something that's been hardwired into our biology for millions of years. It's all about survival.
Scientists are now proposing that we just drop the whole romanticized idea of Stockholm Syndrome completely. Let's replace it with a much more accurate biological term, appeasement. This isn't about affection, it's about survival. It's not loyalty, it's about de-escalation. It's not love, it's a deep biological instinct.
Appeasement is this unconscious survival instinct. When you're trapped, your brain knows that fighting back could be fatal. So instead, it does something absolutely incredible. It tries to calm the attacker down. By staying calm, the victim's nervous system can actually influence and co-regulate the perpetrator's nervous system, making them less violent. This isn't weakness, this isn't love, it is a profoundly powerful biological tactic to stay alive.
So, how do these ideas, trauma bonding and appeasement, play out beyond the bank vaults and in the much, much more common setting of an abusive home?
I mean, just look at the infamous case of Patty Hearst. She's the newspaper heiress who was kidnapped by a terrorist group and then was seen robbing a bank with them. Her lawyers argued she was brainwashed. The prosecution said she was a willing criminal. The jury convicted her, but decades later she was pardoned, with everyone acknowledging she wasn't acting of her own free will.
This case just shows how hard it is for us, on the outside, to understand the mind of someone under that kind of extreme pressure.
And this is why this matters to all of us. You don't need to be in a hostage situation to create a trauma bond. Look at this recipe. A real threat, being isolated, feeling like you can't escape, and then those little breadcrumbs of kindness. This exact dynamic can exist in an intimate relationship, in a toxic workplace, or even inside a family.
And this quote right here brings us to the most important point of all. Experts are urging us to completely change the conversation. We need to stop calling survivors sick or saying they have a syndrome. We need to recognize their actions for what they actually are, a phenomenal and incredibly creative strategy to survive an impossible situation.
So the next time you hear a story about a victim who seems to defend their abuser, maybe the question isn't, why don't they just leave? Maybe the real question we should be asking is this: are we looking at a syndrome, or are we witnessing one of the most powerful and misunderstood displays of human resilience?
Thanks for joining us for this explainer. If this helped you see things differently, help us change the conversation from judgment to understanding by sharing this with someone who needs to see it.